So the meeting is currently in progress. Sound check. Presenter's laptop. Sound check. Clerk's laptop.
Back. Thank you. We're now live, councillors. Good morning. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. Members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which will be adhered to during this meeting. Members can submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make comments. I'll now commence a roll call. Please indicate your presence when I call your name. Mayor Eisenberger.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. Councillor Wilson.
Good morning and happy birthday, Dad.
So moving on to a province where there were provincial projections just yesterday.
Councillor Farr.
Good morning. Happy birthday, Brad.
No, Dad, my dad.
Oh.
No.
Is there a message there for us?
Happy birthday, Dad.
If cake is coming with the greeting, I will take it. Councillor Nan.
Good morning.
Too funny. Councillor Marula.
President, I'm glad Jason did that because I was prepared to do the same. So happy birthday to Brenda's dad, by the way.
There you go. Okay. We're not even getting through the agenda yet. Councillor Collins, are you there?
Present. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. I got tears in my eyes, Sam. Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Deputy Mayor, seriously, Councillor Jackson is here. Thank you.
I'm glad that you have serialized the meeting. Councillor Pauls.
Well,
I can see you there.
7 is
Good morning, Councillor. Councillor Danko.
Good morning and happy birthday, Chad.
Councillor Pearson.
Good morning, President.
Councillor Johnson.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Councillor Ferguson.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor Vanderbeek.
Good morning.
Good morning, Councillor Whitehead. And that's it. Approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda today?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, no, there are no changes to today's agenda.
Thank you. May I please have a mover and a seconder to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Any questions or comments about the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to the vote, please. Sorry, Madam Clerk, I was on the wrong page there for a minute. Councillor Johnson, did you get the vote? This is to approve the agenda. Thumbs up from Councillor Johnson. Thank you. And that carries 14-0. Declarations of interest. Members of the committee, are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you. So we're moving on to item 6.1, staff presentations. 2021 tax supported operating budget FC S21001 citywide. Mike Zagaric is the General Manager of Finance and Corporate Services, and he'll provide the presentation for item 6.1. Mr. Zagaric,
Motion to
please.
approve the budget.
Good morning, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and good morning, committee members, and thank you for that laughter. I think I needed it this morning. Just as I pull up and share my presentation, just a reminder that you would have received the tax operating budget documents prior to the holiday shutdown. And the intention for today is to provide a little more detail to those documents, as well as to provide a update to the information that's contained in that document. So just as a reminder as to what is presented in the document and where we currently sit with respect to the 2021 tax supported operating budget, the budget as presented maintains services and service levels for 2021. Council has did approve late in 2020 an inflationary increase to user fees, generally approximately 2%, with a limited number of exceptions, including the freezing of a small number of fees in response to the current pandemic. The tax capital levy was approved with an increase of 0.4%, in addition to the 0.4% increase that supports the city's Year 5 transit program and our ISIP application to senior levels of government. It also provides some necessary funding as it relates to the City of Hamilton's DC exemption program. In addition to the 0.4%, just a reminder that Council did approve some additional investments in transportation, and those were funded principally from reserves. And finally, as a reminder, Council has set a guideline for boards and agencies of approximately 2%, and we have some updates with respect to the boards and agencies in today's presentation. And finally, the boards and agencies will be presenting in the next few weeks to committee their 2021 budget requests. You may recall when we started the 2021 budget process, we presented a forecast of an increase of approximately $44.5 million, which represents a 4% residential tax increase. The budget documents that were presented to you a few weeks ago represent a levy increase, a required levy increase, forecasted at approximately $34.8 million, representing a residential tax increase of 2.9%. So we made some progress between October and December to achieve Council's guideline. And the update I am presenting today presents two scenarios. One is a updated forecast of 2.4%. So again, the documents that you have, that you received in December, forecast at 2.9. We currently sit at 2.4%, and I'll explain the factors that are contributing to that reduction. And inclusive of the budget approved by Hamilton Police Services Board, which is slightly over and above the 2% guideline, inclusive of that approved budget that will be presented to committee, we sit at 2.5%. So you'll see at the top of this chart, again, the information that was presented through the budget book documents recommends a levy increase of approximately $34.8 million, or a 2.9% residential increase. Since that time, there are some approved amendments to the recommended budget, a slight amendment as it relates to a park improvement in Ward 3 with the impact of just short of $12,000. As well, Council approved a motion recognizing that the Roxborough Affordable Housing demonstration project will likely not take effect immediately in 2021. Council approved a half-year adjustment to the enhancement as it relates to the Roxborough demonstration program, and that represents a savings of approximately $1 million in 2021. That phase-in will extend that program to 2026. So it's a half-year rule in 2021 and a half-year rule in 2026. As well, as I mentioned previously, Council did approve a revised financing strategy for our discretionary block funding program, which represented a $4.5 million pressure, and that was funded principally from reserves. And finally, there was a error with respect to, on the capital financing or capital projects, there were some operating impacts to capital that represents a pressure of approximately $865,000. So that brings the $34.8 million down to a $30 million levy increase. There was a clerical error with respect to the operating impacts from capital. We lost track of those operating impacts from capital in our final version of the budget documents that were presented to you. So while the budget documents make reference to the fact that those are included in the 2.9% figure, I apologize that those were lost in that 2.9%. So we need to incorporate those. That represents a $2.5 million pressure to that 2.9 million or 2.9% figure. As well, there we caught a foregone revenue pressure in the 2021 forecast in Provincial Offences Act that is principally related to COVID and should not have been reflected in our 2021 base budget. And that represents an amendment or reduction of $1 million. Finally, some positive news. The province did provide a recent update to the Blue Box revenue sharing, and that represents an increase in funding to the City of Hamilton in 2021 of approximately $1.4 million, bringing the total contribution in excess to $6 million in 2021. So again, a positive update from the province as it relates to revenue sharing for the Blue Box program. So inclusive of these potential amendments, the three potential amendments above, we currently sit at approximately still $30.2 million. And that represents a reduction to the 2.9% of about 0.5%. I mentioned previously that Hamilton Police Services Board have approved the budget, and that will be presented to committee in the coming weeks. That represents a pressure of approximately $1.3 million over and above the 2% guideline. And there were some further minor adjustments to boards and agencies relative to council's guideline that represent a additional pressure of just short of $3,000. So again, inclusive of the requested Hamilton Police Services, or what will be requested by Hamilton Police Services Board, that would represent a reduction of approximately 0.4 from the previously reported 2.9. So again, exclusive of the additional funding that will be requested from Hamilton Police Services, we sit at 2.4%, inclusive of the funding from Hamilton Police Services that will be requested. That would represent a 2.5% residential increase. So some good news relative to what was reported to committee members through the December budget documents. As it relates to the 2.5%, I'll base this slide on the 2.5% scenario. You'll see that city departments are contributing approximately 1.8% of that 2.5% increase, or about $66. Boards and agencies, approximately half, or 0.5%, half of 1% of the 2.5%. And finally, the council approved capital financing strategy for 2021 represents 0.2%. So for a total of 2.5%, again, rolling in and making an assumption with the Hamilton Police Services Board approved budget, that would represent for an average residential household assessed at $380,300, an increase of approximately $92. The next slide provides a breakdown, and I won't speak to this slide in detail as the general managers will be presenting this month to committee their recommended 2021 budgets. But the next slide breaks down our current position as it relates to the departmental increases, inclusive of the amendments, approved amendments, and potential amendments that were on slide number 4. So you can see the departmental increases as well as the boards and agencies increase and the capital financing increase. And as well, we're providing the two scenarios, the 2.5% and the 2.4% scenario in this slide. And again, details related to the departmental increases can be found in the budget documents, but again, general managers will be presenting their recommended budgets to committee in the coming weeks. Just to break down the city department's $22.5 million recommended increase, which represents the 1.8%. Just to break that down somewhat, the operating impacts of capital represent $3.4 million of the $22.5 million. There's some pressures environmental services that I'll speak to that represents $1.5 million. Some additional investments in housing services of approximately $1 million, and a impact from the provinces, an amendment that was introduced in 2017 around changing provincial municipal cost sharing. This is specific to children's services, where the municipality is accountable for 20% of the cost for additional children's services spaces that represent approximately $800,000 in pressures in 2021. So you can see that those four factors, netting off those four factors from the $22.5 million, brings us to a maintenance budget of approximately just short of $16 million, or 1.1%. And to break down that maintenance budget of approximately $16 million, you can see the majority of that $16 million is tied to our staff. We are principally service providers, and as a result, we have ongoing employee-related costs, commitments to our staff through our collective agreements, through COLA adjustments, through our benefit programs, through Canada Pension Plan commitments, through AI commitments, and through WSIB commitments. Inclusive of all those factors, that represents approximately $14.8 million, or a majority of the approximately $16 million in maintenance pressures. You'll recall that there were some contractual pressures that started in 2020 that continue in 2021 around the new curbside waste collection contract, and that represents an additional pressure of $2.9 million. There are commitments with Metrolinx as it relates to the Presto operating agreement in 2021, and staff are presenting a pressure of approximately $1.1 million as it relates to those requirements, commitments. We continue to face some pressures with respect to computer software licensing costs, contractual costs, and that represents a pressure of approximately $900,000. And there are a series of other factors that represent a total of an additional $1.2 million. Offsetting those pressures are some savings or efficiencies. Fuel and energy costs, we are noting that there are some favorable trending as it relates to those costs in 2021 relative to 2020, and we've made those adjustments as it relates to those unit costs for fuel and energy. That represents a savings of approximately $1.1 million. The community recycling center contract, there's a annual savings in that contract in 2021 that represents a savings of approximately $1.5 million. And finally, the user fees that council approved late in 2020 should represent an additional $2.5 million in revenues, I should note, in a normal year in 2021. And you'll see that all of those factors above represent the short of $16 million that we are describing as a maintenance budget in 2021. I mentioned previously the housing, the additional $1 million in housing investment contributing to the 2021 levy. That's the remnant of the Roxborough Housing Incentive Program, the demonstration program. So again, that we are still capturing $1 million of additional investment in affordable housing through that program. The recycling program revenue pressure, there's a pressure of approximately $1.5 million. Committee members may recall in 2020, we drew from the recycling reserve to assist us in arriving at last year's tax increase at 2.9 due to some pressures with respect to the recycling revenue contract and
Mr.
the revenues that, yes.
You'll have
through the chair.
to repeat that last minute and a half. You kind of broke up there.
Okay, so through the chair or through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, is it just slide number 9, or do you need me to return to slide number 8?
Just on slide, you are on slide 9, sir.
Okay, apologize for that. I'll just
No,
make sure
don't worry
that
about
the
it.
mic
It's
piece is
technology.
close. So again, the Roxborough Housing Incentive Program, while on an annualized basis, it represents $2.1 million. Previously, I mentioned that we are adjusting for 2021 to capture a half year, as the building permits are likely not to be drawn immediately in January. So there continues to be $1 million captured as the investment or enhancement in affordable housing through that program. The recycling program revenue pressure of $1.5 million represents the fact that in 2020 we drew on the recycling reserve to help us achieve the 2.9% residential tax increase in 2020. And as that reserve has been depleted, it's no longer available to assist with the pressures as it relates to the value of recyclable products in the marketplace. So that represents a pressure of $1.5 million. And as I mentioned previously, the previously announced change in cost sharing for children's services with the province of Ontario represents an additional $800,000 pressure for us in 2021. Some of the additional drivers include, as I mentioned previously, in IT, there's been a change in software providers' delivery of their services from licenses to subscriptions, and that continues to represent a pressure to us of approximately $900,000 in 2021. There are investments in West Harbour and the waterfront strategic initiatives of approximately $900,000. Some investments in transportation infrastructure of $400,000. Additional investments in tree planting and parks maintenance of approximately $300,000. An investment in performance and learning management system of approximately $200,000, and an investment of $100,000 in their backflow prevention program, and finally a series of other factors or investments of $600,000 that represent a total of $3.4 million. So again, these are some of the additional budget drivers for 2021 that represent approximately $6.7 million. Through the capital budget program, Council approved an additional $2 million of funding for DC exemptions. This is the city's one of the city's tools that we utilize to help to facilitate growth and development in the community. As well as I mentioned previously, the year 5 of the transit program and our ISIP application represents a pressure of approximately $1.6 million in capital financing in 2021. And there were some prior year adjustments. This is principally boards and agencies capital programs. And what you'll see is a $600,000 savings, and that really represents a lower cost to borrow for projects that were approved for boards and agencies, and that's principally Hamilton Police Services and Hamilton Public Library. Because of lower cost to borrow, there's a savings of approximately $600,000. So capital financing, you'll see, represent a $3 million driver to our 2021 levy. With respect to boards and agencies, you can see that in 2021, the boards and agencies budget is increasing by 2.6%, or just short of $6 million. We've broken down the conservation authorities and specifically the agreement the city has entered into with Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority for the Bimbrook Special Levy, capital levy. So that represents an impact of approximately $92,000. The conservation authorities, you'll see we are reporting are coming in overall at the 2% guideline. That represents a pressure of approximately $172,000. Hamilton Farmers Market, we're reporting at the guideline of 2% or a $2,000 pressure. Hamilton Beach Rescue Units are coming in below the guideline with a reduction of 2.1% or about $3,000 reduction relative to 2020. MPAC, we are reporting on the guideline, and we'll have to review once we have greater detail on our contract with with MPAC, but currently we're reflecting them at the guideline of 2% or $137,000 pressure. Royal Botanical Gardens at the guideline of 2% or a $13,000 increase. Hamilton Police Services, what we are reporting here is what the board approved, which was just short of a 3% increase, and which would represent an increase of approximately $5.1 million. And finally, library will be presenting to committee a recommended 1.5% increase, or an increase of approximately $430,000. So again, that provides a breakdown to boards and agencies, which represent a increase or pressure just short of $6 million in 2021. Just also want to speak to the complement information that's in the budget documents that were distributed in December. You can see that we started 2020 with a full-time equivalent complement, staffing complement of just short of 5,900 FTEs. There are some additional pressures in 2021 as it relates to capital projects that were approved in 2018, 19, or 20. So these were previously approved capital projects that are coming online in 2021, and that represents the need for just short of 15 additional FTEs in 2021. There are some reductions that are reported in Hamilton Health, in Healthy and Safe Communities. You may recall that the province amended the delivery of employment services, and as a city is no longer the service provider for employment services. You may recall that this was phased in 2020 and 2021, and that represents about 25 FTEs of the reported 31 FTEs. And there's some additional adjustments in Healthy and Safe Communities that make up the overall reduction of 31 FTEs, and Paul will be presenting more detail regarding those reductions through the departmental presentation. In planning and economic development, you can see a reduction of 13.25 FTEs. That's principally the elimination of the LRT office that represented 12.25 of the 13.25 FTEs. And in Public Works, there are some adjustments reductions as relates to full-time equivalent positions that represent just short of 6 FTEs. And in the City Manager's Office, the approved 2 communication FTEs that were approved through the 2021 budget. And so we're reflecting the reduction of those 2 FTEs through the 2021 budget. But again, those were approved and the funding was reflected in the 2020 budget. In corporate services, you'll see a net addition of 3.5 FTEs. You may recall in 2020 when we reported with respect to our costs to insure the corporation that the City of Hamilton made some adjustments to our deductibles in an effort to try to contain the costs of our risk management, our insurance costs. Council approved an enhancement of 4 FTEs. There was a reduction of half an FTE that was approved as a pilot program in 2019 that staff are recommending is no longer required. So for a net increase of 3.5 FTEs. So again, what you'll see in the budget documents is that inclusive of the additional approximately 15 FTEs required to support our capital projects that were approved in previous years, we're reflecting a reduction in overall complement of approximately 34 FTEs. With respect to tax policies, and I'll speak to this relatively quickly today as we'll have future updates with respect to tax policies. We continue to be limited, impacted by some levy restrictions. Just to remind committee members and the public that the province imposes some thresholds as it relates to tax ratios on municipalities as on the property classes. We have a protected class. Our industrial tax ratios exceed the province's fairness threshold, and as a result, we can only pass on 50% of levy increases onto the industrial property class. The multi-residential class, you may recall, is a restricted class, and the province imposed this restriction back in 2017, and municipalities in Ontario cannot pass on reassessment impacts or levy impacts onto the multi-residential property class, and that will continue in 2021. Also, because of the pandemic, we've reported previously that the province of Ontario has paused on the reassessment period. So 2021 was to represent a new 4-year reassessment period. So again, they have paused on the 2021 reassessment, and that will result in no reassessment shifts in 2021. It'll make our budget deliberations a little simpler, and that we won't have to speak to some of the shifts that have occurred in previous years where the commercial tax burden and multi-residential tax burden has principally been borne on the residential sector. So we won't have that, what we've experienced in the last 4 years, which has represented a 0.5% residential impact, or about $16 per year, or about $64 annualized over the last 4 years of a tax shift onto the residential property class. So finally, 2021 will simply reflect any budgetary adjustments as well. If there were to be any area rating decisions, those would be captured as part of our tax policies and final budget and tax figures that we would report and present in March or April. As well as a reminder that through the last provincial budgets, the government, the province of Ontario, has committed to a reduction in the business education tax rate to, it's effectively a tax rate of 0.88%. And for the commercial class, that'll represent a 10% reduction in their business education tax rate. And for the industrial property class, that'll represent a 25% reduction in their business education tax rate. So very positive news for those two classes, especially in light of our current circumstances. In addition, the province announced through the budget some opportunities for municipalities to pursue a new small business property class, and I believe this was formed part of the mayor's task force and their reporting. And again, we're still awaiting the legislation and the regulations as it relates to the opportunity for a new small business property class. It's a opportunity that I'll simply say that staff will have to do some investigation on, as there are potential consequences of, again, causing a shift from one class, from the commercial class onto the residential class. What you'll note in the slide that's before you, currently staff are suggesting implementation for 2022. Again, we're still awaiting the regulations. We haven't received the regulations, and subject to the regulations and what capacity or flexibility municipalities have, we would report back with opportunities as it relates to creating a new small business property class. And just a reminder that council has put forward resolutions with respect to the creative enterprise property tax class. And again, that correspondence has been forwarded on from staff to the province of Ontario. And finally, staff will be reporting back to committee with respect to the opportunity with respect to the residential vacancy tax and some legislative changes that would be required for the city of Hamilton to pursue such a tax. So again, inclusive of those adjustments that I spoke to previously, we sit at about a 2.5% residential tax increase. That represents an increase in additional levy funding of just short of $31.5 million. In order to achieve a 2% residential tax increase, that would require an additional $4.5 million in savings or reductions And finally, to achieve a residential tax increase of 1% would require an additional $13.5 million in savings and reductions. Just want to highlight, I appreciate committee members are quite familiar with this, but for the benefit of local taxpayers, some of the constraints that this council and other councils face as it relates to driving some efficiencies, financial efficiencies or savings. As it relates to municipal property taxes, each household's property tax burden really represents approximately 55% in city services that council has authority over. Just short of 50% of the overall tax burden, council does not have any authority or control over that. And these represent not only provincially funded programs or programs where the province dictate the delivery model or level of service, but that also includes boards and agencies, as well as the education tax rate that council does not have control and authority over. So one of the challenges that council has as it relates to those targets that I just spoke to in terms of what would be required to achieve a 2% or a 1% residential tax increase, that in order to derive those reductions, council would have to focus on approximately 50% of what property taxpayers are funding, and that as a result limits council to look at opportunities around user fees and increasing user fees. And just want to note that council's already approved the 2021 user fees, so there are some challenges with respect to some further adjustments in those fees, but as well as around services. Your council's really limited with looking at services, service levels, and focusing on making adjustments, principally reductions in services, service levels to achieve some of those targets, especially under the 1%, but as well under the 2%, as a 2% target would result in the need for an additional $4.5 million in efficiencies and savings. I just want to provide some preliminary information to committee as to where we sit relative to some of our comparators. You'll see that we currently sit somewhere in the middle of the pack with a limited number. So again, we're just trying to include information that we are able to gather. Some municipalities have approved their budgets. Some, like ourselves, are currently deliberating, and some are at the early stages of their budgets with some targets. You can see in this graph that Ottawa and London have approved their budgets with residential tax increases of 3% and 3.4%. You can see where we currently sit at 2.5%. And I'll just note with the City of Toronto, there should be a caveat there that the 0.8%, there's an additional Building Toronto fund for transit and housing of 1.5%. So that should be reported at 2.3%, not 0.8%. So I apologize for that oversight. Also important to note that our 2.5% is exclusive of education. You'll recall that in previous years, as we get information around education, that has had some favorable results for us. And so traditionally that's been we've realized a reduction of 0.1 or 0.2. So again, as we get that information in the coming months, we'll provide that information to council. Also important to note that that 2.5% does not include council referred items or business cases, and this information is contained in your budget documents and will be presented to you through future committee meetings. And I'll just quickly highlight that there are currently 3 council referred items to the 2021 budget process, 1 through Healthy and Safe Communities, 1 through Public Works. And finally, we're showing 1 as a preliminary that was recently referred to the 21 budget process through Audit, Finance, Admin yesterday, but that has to go to council next week. So again, we're just noting that as a placeholder. If all three of the council referred items were to be approved, we're reflecting a preliminary forecast of a 0.1% tax increase. Just as a reminder as to what that, sorry, let me just get back on slide here. Just as a reminder as to what those three projects are in healthy and safe communities, council approved seeking some additional funding in support of Good Shepherd Center's emergency shelter proposal. That would represent a net levy increase of $950,000 if that proposal was approved. And that would be an investment in municipal funding for a portable housing benefit program for women, transgender, and non-binary adults in the city of Hamilton. And again, that represents a pressure of $950,000. As well, again, through audit, finance, admin, which will go to council. Tomorrow was the approval of a production policy and the request from staff for one additional FTE. So that's subject to approval at council. And finally, within Public Works is the sidewalk clearing program that was reported in 2020 with a series of options. And I just want to note that the sidewalk clearing program would not have an impact in 2021, as staff would be looking to deliver that program, if approved, either in late 2022 or early 2023. So it would likely have a minor impact if approved in the 2022 budget, but principally would be reflected in 2023 as an annualized program. So again, that's the sidewalk clearing program. Those are the three council referred items as well. There are a limited number of business cases. SLT took the approach of recognizing our current circumstances. We made an effort to limit the number of business cases to be put forward in 2021 in an effort to minimize the impact on the levy. However, we did identify a number of priority areas for investment. One in planning and economic development, one in healthy and safe communities, and finally one in corporate services. If these business cases were all approved, that too would represent an additional tax impact of 0.1%. In planning and economic development, the request is for one FTE. This is a position that's been on contract for 2 years. And is funded through Hamilton Immigration Partnership Council. It's really an outreach coordinator to engage with Hamilton's immigrant population on immigration and project-related issues. So apologize for the label. It's not a communications position. It's really an outreach coordinator to assist in working with our immigrant population on some projects. Specific projects. And again, this is a position that's been on contract for 2 years, zero net levy, but under our complement control policy would require council's approval to make that a permanent FTE. Under healthy and safe communities, you'll recall the multi-year proposal for Hamilton paramedic services, and this is in an effort to try to continue to provide services at current levels given the demand in services and Hamilton paramedic services. The enhancement represents an additional ambulance that would be funded principally through development charges and the additional FTE, 10 FTE required to, again, make an effort to maintain current service levels. This represents a net impact of approximately $500,000 in 2021. Gross, you'll see $1 million. Just a reminder to committee members that under the cost sharing program with the provincial government, is the province does not fund paramedic services completely, enhancements in paramedic services completely, effectively until the second year of the program. So the municipality bears 50% of the cost in the first year of the enhancement. And the final business case is for additional resources and IT services. We're seeing some challenges with respect to, as mentioned previously, the transition from licenses to subscriptions in an effort to try to manage those contracts with our software providers, as well as the city looks to execute on our cloud based deployments. We're noting some additional resources in an effort to support our cloud strategy in IT. And again, there'll be more detail provided to committee members through the departmental budgets, but as well, we have a committee meeting set aside specifically for council referred and business cases. Beyond 2021, I just want to provide just a quick update with respect to what we see looking forward. In the next 3 years, you'll see that in 2022, 2023, and 2024, we're forecasting residential tax increases in that 2% to 3.5%. And again, this would represent principally maintenance budget pressures. Some of the drivers to these forecasts are, as in 2021, operating impacts from capital projects approved in previous years, as well as a return to the 0.5% for our capital block program, so the traditional financing strategy, as well as changes in provincial funding and cost-sharing agreements that we're expecting in future years, and finally, the continuation of investments in our 10-year transit strategy. So those are some of the drivers that we're capturing in these future forecasts, just to provide committee a sense as to what staff see on the horizon as it relates to the tax operating program over the next few years. Finally, as it relates to process, again, the intent for today was simply to provide an overview of the budget documents that were shared with you in December, as well as to provide some of those amendments that we've captured since December, to give you a sense as to where we sit before the departmental boards and agencies presentations and the public delegations. And you'll see that boards and agencies start next week, January 19th and the 21st. Transit Day continues to be a dedicated day. That's scheduled for January 22nd. Departmental presentations late in January into February. And there's a date set aside for public delegations on February the 8th. And finally, a number of dates set aside for further budget deliberations. And we are currently reflecting a council-approved target date of March 31st. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, happy to answer any questions committee members might have, and thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Zagarek, for a very comprehensive report. We have a number of speakers who'd like to ask some questions. Which end starts first there, Madam Clerk? Thank you very much. Councillor Collins, Ferguson, Danko, and Wilson. Councillor Collins, you're up first.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I do have a number of questions that I think operationally I'll probably hold over until the presentations are formally made by the GMs for the respective departments. But I did want to thank Mike for the comprehensive presentation as always. And I was just looking through the first part of the presentation, Mike, you mentioned that there were some changes to be made, and I didn't know if formally you required a motion to implement some of those revisions that you talked about that'll lower us further and closer to 2%. So I believe it might have been slide 3 or 4 right at the start of the presentation. And if you do require a formal motion, I would certainly be willing to put that forward at the appropriate time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if it's the will of committee, I'll just steer you to the middle of this chart under potential amendments. We will require council approval of these amendments. The operating impacts of capital, again, that were lost, and apologize again for losing track of those impacts, as well as the adjustment in our POA foregone revenues that represents a reduction of $1 million in pressures, and finally the favorable update from the province of an additional $1.4 million. So if it's the will of committee to approve these at this time, that would assist us as it relates to reporting forward with respect to the 2.4, 2.5% scenarios.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. If you could come back to me after you've exhausted your speakers list, I'd be prepared to move that.
Thank you, Councillor. I appreciate that. The next speaker on the list is Councillor Ferguson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mike, thanks for your presentation also. It's always interesting, and clearly we're in better shape now than we were last year at this time. But I'm going to, as Councillor Collins says, we've got a long way to go, and a lot of my questions will be directed at the GM presentations, and also I think we have a side budget meeting with the city manager on Monday, so I can drill down on some of these questions. But just one to start with, because I'm seeing a disconnect which I don't understand. On slide 8, you showed the drivers of a maintenance budget is $14.8 million for salaries, wages, and benefits. But on page 41 of the budget book, it shows that employee-related costs is $21.3 million. Why are there different numbers there?
Mr. Zagarek?
Yes, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we can get back to the councillor. I'll have to look at the information the councillor's referring to in the budget document, and we'll reconcile to that.
Okay, maybe we can talk about that on Monday, but you're showing a $30 million increase on page 41 of the tax budget. And 21 of that, or 2/3 of it, is employee-related cost. You're showing 3% on that, 3.5%, I'm sorry. And I'm puzzled by the 3.5%. We can once again do this on later dates once you have a chance to get your head around it. But our collective agreements, we're all around the 2% area. Some are even go down at the latter part of the collective agreements. Some are entering into that now because we're into the last 2 years of most of our collective agreements. So I'm puzzled how we get that up to 3.5%. And because that's an area we have to focus. I mean, our employees, well, they do great work for us. They're in a bit of a bubble. No one's lost their job. But if you look at our community, we have hundreds, if not thousands of people in the travel, hospitality, and retail business. Not only didn't get an increase in 2020 as our employees did, but they're actually unemployed. And so a 2.5% budget increase is going to be tough to sell. But I'll take those up with you offline, Mike, particularly around the employee-related costs. Since that's 2/3 of the increase, I'd like to drill down to that a little further with you, and we can do that on Monday or at future meetings. So I thank you for your time, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Zagarek, did you have any response at this time?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'll just note that the $14 million is our collective agreements, COLA, our benefits, employer benefits, government benefits, CPP, but over and above that is staff who are not at the top of their salary range, who haven't had number or years of service to achieve the top of their salary band or range are entitled to merit increase. So that will be a pressure in 2021 as well. But we'll provide a breakdown because there are other cost categories that form part of the number in page 41 under employee related costs beyond just salary and benefits. So we can provide that detail as well. So there are some other categories beyond just salary and benefits in that $21 million figure.
So Mike, are you saying then that the $15.8 million in slide 8 does not include any of the COLA increases?
Nope. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it absolutely includes the COLA increases. But if there are training costs or development costs as it relates to employees, those would be captured in the $21 million figure, but are not captured in the $14 million figure. The $14 million figure was intended to just speak to our commitments to employees as it relates to compensation specifically, including benefits.
That just triggers up one last question then, Mr. Chair, if you'd be patient with me. The province imposed a limit of 1% on provincial employees, and we're going to be in that, well, employee cost 3.5%, but I suspect the COLA is somewhere around the 2.2% or 2.2 or 2.3%, and we can get that. Do we need to, I suspect the province suspended their collective agreements is why they were able to get a limit of 1% increase to provincial employees. Is that something that the city should pursue with the province to give us that same authority?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, there were a number of questions there. First off, the COLA is 1.6%. So what our commitment is under collective agreements, and we're reflecting for 2021 is 1.6%. And the council will recall this, that when the previous government imposed the broader public sector wage restraint, and as this government did as well, it did not include municipalities. And when municipalities under the previous government pursued expanding that restraint to municipalities, the provincial government was not supportive of that request. It's always at discretion of council to make such a request, but I just noting that under the previous provincial government, there wasn't a interest in expanding or extending that legislation to include municipalities.
Okay, but things have changed a lot since then with COVID. So, okay, I'm going to be pursuing this in the future, as Councillor Collins is, but I just wanted to focus in on 2/3 of our budget increases is employee-related costs. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. The next speaker is Councillor Danko, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at a few things that popped out to me in the budget presentation. The first one, in one of the budget drivers for 2021, I noticed curbside collection is a $2.9 million budget pressure. And just going back to previous discussions, reminding committee that, again, biweekly landfill waste collection was estimated to save $2.1 million every year, which would have been about a 0.2% budget decrease on the levy right now if we would have had to move forward with that as something that nobody would have really even noticed. Another one of the pressures I saw was DC exemptions. So through you to Mr. Zagaric, I think it was $2 million. Could you just explain what that was specifically?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the municipalities in general are required to fund two forms of development charge or DC exemptions. These are by exemptions, these are the waiving of development charges for specific classes. And in the city of Hamilton, these two forms include statutory requirements. So these are requirements that the province imposes restrictions on, as well as discretionary. So in the city of Hamilton, we have a number of programs, either our downtown community improvement area program, the Roxborough one I made reference to through this morning's presentation in support of affordable rental and ownership housing. There's programs for the agriculture sector, for the commercial sector, for the industrial sector. So these are this is one of the tools the municipality has in an effort to try to incent, facilitate growth. What we've noted is a shortfall in our funding relative to our liabilities for development charge exemptions, which is why staff recommended an additional $2 million. This is over and above the funding that's already reflected in both our tax and our rate-supported programs. I should note what this does not include is some recent legislative changes that would extend the legislative or statutory requirements as it relates to our post-secondary partners. So that may be a future pressure in 2022 that we report on.
Thank you. And through you, there was discussion yesterday at AFNA committee about an additional $840,000 exemption to smart centers, which is a $9.4 billion corporation. How would that figure into our budget for DC exemptions?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, what was approved at Audit, Finance, Admin and still subject to council approval is to fund that exemption, and that exemption really represented the extension of DC credits. We have a policy that after 5 years of a demolition of an existing program, those credits for for the area that was demolished expire at the end of 5 years, and in parts that is in an effort to free up capacity if that capacity is not required in beyond the 5-year period, but as well as an encouragement for property owners to redevelop and to use that land for either residential or economic purposes. So what was approved at Audit, Finance, and Admin Committee yesterday was to draw on our unallocated capital reserve, as DCs are related to infrastructure. So that was approved. It wouldn't have an impact on the budget. It would have an impact on the status of that reserve.
Thank you, Mr. Zagaric. I noticed in the presentation there was a note towards the vacant property tax. Is that something that we're expecting to be a report pending? And I think Councillor Nam might have further questions on that.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe we're targeting to report back in February. Brian McMullen might correct me if I'm wrong. There are 2 jurisdictions in Canada that have the authority to impose a vacant property tax, Vancouver and the City of Toronto. Councillor Nam put forward a motion last year asking staff to report back on the feasibility of imposing such a tax, and I believe we are targeting February. And again, Brian McMullen will correct me if I'm wrong.
Thank you. And just refresh my memory, General Manager Zagaric, I believe there was a motion on the table. I think the mayor moved it for a land transfer tax, and this council turned that down. It might have been a year and a half ago or so. I can't remember exactly, but just that's off the table, I believe. Correct?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct. We haven't the authority nor direction to examine or introduce a land transfer tax. Again, the only jurisdiction, I believe, in Ontario that has such an authority currently and does impose one is City of Toronto.
Just looking at the pressures on taxpayers in Hamilton, perhaps another missed opportunity. Looking forward to the end of the presentation, General Manager Zagaric. We had projected a 4.2% increase in 2021, and now we're looking at about 2.5%. So we've been very successful, surprisingly successful in this year of COVID to reduce that rate down to something that is close to the rate of inflation. So I think that's a really good news story, actually, that shouldn't be missed. And noting that 45% of our taxes we have no control over. So my understanding is that other 55% that we do have control over, what that means is if we're trying to reduce that tax rate further, basically we have to cut $2 of services or programming for every $1 of savings. Is that kind of a rough estimation of just the split between what we have control over and what we don't?
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the councilor's correct. Unfortunately, taxpayers, understandably so, look at their total tax bill and assume that those proceeds are going towards municipal services in general. They don't necessarily have an appreciation of some of the constraints council has over control of the taxes that they provide to the City of Hamilton. A portion of those are remitted directly to the province of Ontario as it relates to education. Approximately 15% residential, 25% of commercial and industrial. That's going to change slightly for the commercial and industrial. Some positive news for those classes as a reduction, as it relates to the reduction of the business education tax rates. But again, council is restricted to looking at principally reducing service levels in those line items that you do have control over, those services that you do have control over, which creates some challenges. As I mentioned previously, to achieve a 2%, we're currently projecting the need for additional $4.5 million in reductions, and that is very material and would result typically in a noticeable reduction in services or service levels.
Thank you, Mr. General Manager Zagaric and Mr. Chairman. Those are all the questions.
Thank you, Councillor. The next speaker is Councillor Wilson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a few questions. And first of all, thank you to Mr. Zagirik for that detailed overview. Very much appreciated. But before I begin, I know there have been some comments made about public sector salaries. I know that makes sometimes for good politics, but there's lots of evidence out there from Canada's top bank and other folks who say it's not good for the economics of communities. So if we're going to have that discussion, you can be assured that I will be coming to the table with those findings, particularly for the residents of this community who depend on this municipality for service. And when we have, as Councillor Danko has pointed out, missed opportunities for our residents to secure some tax savings, whether it's through biweekly land transfer and others. Mr. Zagirik, could you, you talked about in one of your slides, and I apologize, I didn't jot down the number. You talked about underutilized municipal facilities. And I was wondering if you could unpack that, because I don't know how do we presently have benchmarks to identify what is considered to be underutilized, for example. Through you, Chair.
Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we do have a committee, our Portfolio Management Committee, that is tasked with looking at municipal assets where there may be opportunities either to improve the utilization of those assets or to divest in those assets. I'm not sure that that committee has any metrics as it relates to specific assets, but I know that they have eyes on assets. It's an area as well that we want to, increase our resources towards further examinations on how we might better leverage municipal assets, again, either as it relates to utilization of those assets or divesting of those assets. So I apologize, I'm not aware that we have any specific metrics as it relates to benchmarks that we are trying to measure ourselves against with respect to assets. We do have certain policies. We have accommodation policies as it relates to our administrative facilities. There have been studies as it relates to, for instance, our public works yards. There's been over the last number of years a number of reports on the utilization of our and opportunities with respect to our public works yards. There have been some past reports with respect to recreation facilities and the utilization of our recreation facilities. But again, I'm not aware where all this information may be reported in one location.
Thank you. Councillor?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Sorry, Mike. So could I just summarize what I think I heard you say, and I apologize. I just want to fully understand it. There is a committee, a staff committee that is tasked with looking at these facilities, but they don't yet have the information or the data to assess and maybe report on to enable council to make that determination of setting levels of what is considered an active level of service versus that which would be considered dipping underneath whatever council determines to be that benchmark of, is that, and I guess if that is correct, sorry, do you require any direction to further facilitate that work so it could be coming forward in the future, so that if it is identified in your budget presentation, then it could be pursued further? Through you, Chair.
So through you, Mr. Deputy. Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the internal committee I made reference to forms part of the effort. I would say as well, departments have reported back to their standing committees and to councils over the last number of years with respect to facilities. So it's not just the responsibility of the Portfolio Management Committee. is through the standing committees. There have been reports with respect to the utilization of city assets or facilities. So again, if some of that, if it's the will of committee and council in the future that some of that information come back, I'm sure SLT would be happy to review that information and if able to refresh that information and bring it back. But I am aware, and I'm not sure if Dan or Paul or others want to jump in, but I am aware where Public Works have reported back with respect to some of their yard and the utilization of the yards, and in Paul Johnson's department, Healthy Safe Communities, with respect to their recreation facilities. But if there are some specific facilities, we'd be happy to report back on performance of those facilities.
Thank you. Councillor, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just Mr. Zagirik, I certainly understand why this information would be going to the various committees because it would be within their domain. But as a member of council, it's a little challenging for me at within a budget deliberation to assess whether that's even a valid avenue to go down if it's not accumulated and provided in sort of one piece. So if I may ask whether you need a formal direction or whatever, if that could be pursued for the future, it would be, I think, part of my due diligence and the diligence of this council, at least to have the information and then to be able to have that debate and conversation in full transparency to the community would be helpful.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, if it's the will of committee, if there is a motion, staff will report back with respect to what that motion speaks to. If it's a motion asking staff to report back on the utilization and performance of city facilities or assets, we will try to provide the information that committee requires.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, you have 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Thank you, sir. So I guess I will work on that motion and introduce it to you later today, if that's appropriate. My other question is, Mike, in your presentation, I think on page 18, you use the term non-core services. Is there a definition of that for this council?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it was something that the city undertook when we undertook a service delivery review. We looked at core really representing those services that municipalities are mandated to provide or legislated to provide. And then we went a little further to capture and report back on what those service levels might be that either council approved a service level or that the province through regulations or legislation dictate a service level. It was part of that service delivery review. I don't know that it's that information has been updated for the past number of years, but again, that information is public and available for what we are now reporting are 70 services, but at that time where it was in excess of the 70 services we currently reference.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. I know time's ticking, but I guess that relates to my last question in the time that is allotted. You also in your presentation talked about the, as part of our due diligence or opportunity that could be available to us is aligning service levels to comparative municipality and to identify where the city exceeds. And then this council, again, have a full and transparent debate on whether we want those service levels to exceed, and there may be good reason for that. But how do we go about getting that information? Thank you.
Yeah. So,
Councillor, and that'll be, sorry,
Thank you.
Councillor, that'll be your 5 minutes. You go on again after that if you wish. Go ahead, Mr. Zagirik.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, quickly some materials that have been available to councils to help with that those debates and decision making. There is an effort by Ontario City Managers CEOs. It's the municipal benchmarking report that's provided to council annually. Our tax competitiveness report that's done by a third party. BMA that as well is provided to council, and what was traditionally available no longer is available is the province of Ontario used to provide financial information report comparators across municipalities. That's no longer supported by the province, and that would require some additional effort if staff were to review that information.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Councillor Tom Jackson. Good morning, Councillor. You have the floor.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Clark. Good morning to you. As always, General Manager Zagaric, excellent presentation. And thank you for all the details. And Mr. Deputy Mayor, considering I was pleased and proud in March last year, just on the bubble of the pandemic officially occurring with the lockdown at Council, to approve the 2.9% 2020 budget increase for all the right reason of maintaining programs and services and projects moving forward in our city. However, given the 10 months of the pandemic, we're in unique times, and I'm just saying right at this moment,
Councillor Jackson, can I suggest you turn off your video?
Oh,
because you're breaking up. So if you turn your video off, we might get your sound better. Sorry about that interrupting. I'll give you some time back once you get it. There you go. Try again, sir. He seems frozen.
How's that, Deputy Mayor?
Are you there? Okay, can you speak now, Councillor?
Can you hear me, Deputy Mayor? No? Come back to me, please. Come back to me.
Yes, Councillor, I can hear you.
Yeah. Councillor Jackson, we can hear
so
you.
I'm looking to the councillors. It might be my microphone here, or my headset here. So go ahead, Councillor. I'll try and get another headset.
Can everyone hear me?
They're giving you a thumbs up, sir.
I've never felt so important. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so
since it was my fault, sir, I'll start you over at 5 minutes since it was my fault.
You've always been a fair and just man, Deputy Mayor Clark. Thank you. Okay, so everyone, oh yes, I was talking about last year and how proud and pleased I was to support the 2.9% in March, just on the bubble of the pandemic occurring and the lockdown. And however, General Manager Zagaric, 10 months later, we're in very unique times, unfortunately. And so although we've made great progress from the original 4.2% several months ago to 2.5 today, Deputy Mayor Clark, I don't want to stop there. Ideally, I'm saying right out front, I would love to get under 2%. And so I think over the next 2-3 months, Deputy Mayor Clark, we have still lots of work in front of us. And again, I'm going to say, before I get to my questions, I'm going to say I have detected a perception out there amongst some of my constituents that during the pandemic, that there was portions of the municipality and municipal government that maybe just weren't as busy. And hence, if we weren't as busy, then maybe the tax increases should be, Tom, much lower. So I'm putting that out there on the table as of this moment in January, but appreciate General Manager Zagaric, you getting us from 4.2 to 2.5 today. Okay, to just get some questions of clarification, Deputy Mayor Clark. On slide 13, General Manager, you show approximately 34 less FTEs. I take it those are non-union positions. And can I then say definitively that we are reducing our overall complement of non-union by 34 to help this budget? Through you, Deputy Mayor Clark, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I wouldn't categorize these as non-union positions. In fact, they may be principally union positions. But again, what is driving the net reduction of 34, actually it's really a reduction you'll see on slide 13. It's a reduction of 49, but net of an additional approximately 15 staff that we need for new capital projects, then the net is 34. That 49 FTE reduction is principally driven by some changes in the delivery of services, including employment services. So again, when the province changed to a different delivery model for employment services and changed the service provider, that represented a reduction of approximately 26 FTEs in healthy and safe communities. I also made reference to a significant contributor to that at 49 FTE reduction is the elimination of the LRT office when that project was determined not to proceed. That represented approximately 12 and a quarter. So it may be a mix, Councillor, of union, non-union, but the important message is this reduction will not result in service level reductions or service reductions. It's either where funding is no longer being provided from outside parties, or where there's been change in delivery model, or where council has decided to no longer support a particular program.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson?
Yes, and Deputy Mayor Clark, I suspect I'd like to go back on a second time because I know I've got still a series of questions, and I said a couple of minutes of a speech earlier. General Manager Zagarek, so if you recall, General Manager Zagarek, about 5-6 years ago, Council reduced its non-union complement by, if I recall, between 80 and 90 positions. I just want to be clear to my constituents, as part of whatever the final number will be in March or April this year, that I could tell them that a net amount of 34 has been reduced in trying to get the targeted number as low as possible. Is that a fair and accurate statement, General Manager?
Thank you,
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that is accurate.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, General Manager, I'm sure you listened in on Wednesday, if you had the time, to Director Norm Schlehan and the outstanding accomplishments, especially even over the last year. I'm just wondering, unless I missed it on your PowerPoint presentation today, was there an opportunity there to show the expansions of, which will create more manufacturing commercial taxes for our city, of the Panettones, the Amazons, the Sierra Foods, the Walter Groups, the Corbeck companies? These are huge, huge wins that ECDEV has provided for jobs, but mostly for taxes. Wondering if that was factored in or can be factored in the next 2-3 months. Through you, Deputy Mayor Clark, please.
Thank you, Councillor.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, I did listen to Norm's presentation. It was a great presentation and some great outcomes in 2020. So congratulations to Norm, Jason, and the team, and some significant wins for the city as it relates to growing our non-residential assessment base. My short answer is, Councillor, those more recent developments will be captured in future years. Just a reminder is there's a lag as it relates to when those projects are substantially complete and when MPAC captures those developments on the assessment roll. And so we've reported that may typically be a 12 to 24 month lag. So I would expect that those developments would be reported in our 2022, maybe 2023 budgets. What we are reflecting is assessment growth of 1%. We received the final assessment roll from MPAC, the provincial body MPAC, the second Tuesday of December. So we received that just before the holidays. We review that assessment roll, we analyze it, and we typically report back in January, February to this committee with respect to our final number. So we're assuming 1%. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful we'll achieve 1.2%. That would shave our current 2.5% down to maybe 2.3%. I don't want to commit to that until such time as staff have had the opportunity review that. But to your specific question, Councillor, no, we would not capture that those most recent developments. And frankly, I was expecting this question from Councillor Ferguson, because I believe on Wednesday he suggested he would be asking me this question today.
Oh, so you didn't expect it from the Ward 6 councillor. You expected from the Ward 12 councillor. Oh, I get the arrangement here. Okay. Deputy Mayor Clark, how am I doing? Because I still have a few more questions.
You have 1 minute, 30 seconds.
Awesome. Wonderful. Okay. Picking up General Manager Zagaric on where Councillor Wilson left off on comparators. I wrote down here, it would be nice to have average income comparators to some of our neighboring municipalities. I wrote down here, would nice to have comparators of our costs of community services versus our comparators. I wrote down, it would be nice to have showing reduction of service levels during COVID time versus non-COVID time, which we hope to go back out of, hopefully as soon as possible. My point, General Manager Zagaric, is, I saw in your graph, Halton has already approved, I think it was a 1.8, if I saw it correctly, for 2021. Well, how lovely, how lucky, how fortunate. One of the highest average income municipalities, Oakville, and along with Burlington, Milton, Georgetown, making up the Halton region, they could so quickly pass along a 1.8 given their ability to pay. It's so bothersome to me and an awful unfair comparison, but I need to show my constituents some of the pressures we have and the wonderful programs we have that other municipalities don't necessarily need to have. Deputy Mayor Clark, through you to General Manager Zagaric for a reply, please.
Thank you, Councillor, and that exhausts your 5 minutes, so you can go on as a second time, sir.
Perfect. Put me on, please. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Zagaric.
Yeah, so through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I do appreciate the question, because it is challenging to compare, sometimes to appreciate and understand the comparators, in that municipalities don't necessarily provide the same level of service across the board, and demand for services vary from municipality to municipality. So some of the information that the councillors asked for, again, is provided to council, to Councillor Wilson's earlier question, through the municipal benchmarking work that the city managers and COs in the province undertake, where they review services, service levels, and try to learn from one another as it relates to where there may be best practices or opportunities for efficiencies and improvements. As well as it relates to our independent tax competitiveness review, to the councillor's comment around income levels. You'll recall that I've traditionally reported that is one of our challenges with respect to comparators. Our household income levels are somewhere in that 12 to 13% below the average of our comparators. So when comparing tax burden relative to household income, our tax burden through decision making of this council, previous councils. You may recall at the early days of this budget process, I presented historically, we've arrived at an inflationary 2% residential tax increase. So there's been efforts to try to manage the tax increases. What council does not have direct authority over, is income and income level. So that continues to be one of our challenges. But that information is contained. We report annually. We just reported, some months ago on our tax competitiveness study 2019, and I see in my mailbox I've just received the 2020. So we will be reporting in future days. But we're happy to work with corporate communications as part of the overall messaging around the budget process with respect to some of those factors as well.
Thanks, General Manager.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I just don't want to lose sight of an earlier comment, just as a reminder, because that Toronto number really jumps out, is we all don't have the same authorities. Councillor Danko made reference, there are revenue streams that City of Toronto has authority over, the land transfer tax. The other one that I noted just reviewing their documents this week is that they have approximately $100 million in accommodation tax that they are collecting as well. So there are some tools that municipalities can leverage a greater financial benefit out of.
However, General Manager Zagaric, I was referencing directly.
Sorry,
Halton.
Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Jackson, your 5 minutes is up, so you'll have to do that on a second time.
Dang, thank you.
I'm sorry. I have to be fair. Our next first-time speakers is Councillor Pauls and Mayor Eisenberger, please. Councillor Pauls, if you could turn your microphone on. Oh, sorry, I had it in reverse. Sorry, Councillor Pauls.
It's okay, no
It's
problem.
Mayor
Go ahead.
Eisenberger first, and then Councillor Pauls. Sorry about that, Mayor. Go ahead, sir.
No problem. Esther can go first if she likes, but I'm actually quite pleased to be going after Councillor Jackson. You know, it's always a worry for me when we start comparing ourselves to other municipalities, because Halton is a region. Their local municipal, impacts are not necessarily built into that. So, in Toronto has different authorities around things that they can collect. Land transfer tax being a significant one of them that helps them significantly. Actually, with this building boom that we've had, has significantly assisted them in terms of generating revenues off of not off of the tax base, but certainly off of sales of homes and properties in the Greater Toronto area. So, given that, doing these comparisons doesn't particularly help. And word on the street I get, I think lots of people have questions. Let me give you a word on the government that I'm hearing, which is that the next round of assistance for government, and Councillor Jackson and others have been very complimentary on the federal and provincial governments and the amount of money they poured into municipalities and into the hands of individuals to keep them employed and support our economy, to ensure that we don't have a complete and broad collapse of our economy when we do get to recovery stage. The next round of assistance is going to be application based. And I can tell you, and the word from the government is, that if we have not done our part to keep people employed and continue to put resources in the hands of individuals to continue to pay their rents and all the things that they've done, that they also expect some measure of support from municipalities for, that is going to have an impact on future assistance that they're going to provide. They're going to be watching to see if municipalities have also put their resources on the line to ensure that people are remained employed and that services continue to be provided. So I just want to put that word on the government side in your minds, because that's going to be a very important piece of the next round of assistance that we are absolutely going to require. So every municipality across the country is going to be asking for the federal and provincial governments to help offset any and all of our additional costs as a result of this COVID issue, as they did last year, based on a gross estimate. Turns out that their estimate on our transit shortfall was almost 100% bang on. Their estimates in other areas, not so much. And so we've been able to put some in reserve for offsetting those future costs for next year. But there is still going to be a request of other governments for additional resources to be put into place to help us offset and not have to pass those additional costs or deplete our reserves to make all of that functional and keep our tax rates reasonable in future years. So I just want you to be mindful of that as we work through this budget process. It's going to be very important. Having said that, we're in a much better position now than we've been in, in recent years. Our position now is largely aided and assisted by the federal and provincial governments and the resources that they provided. And I want to be sure that we don't lose track of the notion that they're going to be looking for ensuring that municipalities have done their part to do what they are doing, which is keeping money in the hands of individuals in our community, keeping people employed as much as humanly possible, so that when it comes time for an enhanced recovery, which will require and will provide additional stimulus dollars at that moment in time, that we can rightfully say that we've done our part. Having said that, I'm more than happy to second the motion for those three adjustments that Mike Zagarek and Councillor Collins, spoke of. I think those are reasonable adjustments to get us down to a lower number, and getting down to a lower number within reason that will still provide ongoing services in our community, which are still going to be necessary when the recovery comes, and ensuring that we're doing our part to keep people employed, I think are going to be factors that I'm going to be looking for to ensure that we have a reasonable budget. Reasonable in my mind is maintaining core services to the best degree possible, and the employment issues that I just finished talking about. So I worry a little bit about word on the street. Well, maybe some people aren't so very busy. Well, I think everyone's, very busy providing the services that they need to provide in a different way, and they've done an outstanding job doing that. And I think we need to acknowledge that we have frontline services that are working every day. Garbage collection, public works out in the maintaining our streets and our roads and fixing and repairing and all that important heavy duty work. Police services that are out there each and every day, keeping our community safe and managing a lot of the bylaw infraction issues that we're now challenged to enforce as a result of the COVID related issues. The paramedics and all the work that they're doing, and over and above all of that, our public health outstanding effort to try and contain this virus and do the contact tracing that has employed that many more people that we've had offsetting costs and resources aligned to. So there are many, many people continuing to keep our city functional in a very, very significant way. We've laid off a number of part-time people that are employed, at school crossing guards or in areas where there hasn't been a need. I think that is likely to continue again. But I will certainly be looking very, very mindful of ensuring that we are doing our part to continue to support our local economy in concert with our federal and provincial partners. That's going to be a key issue moving forward that they're going to be looking for, and we need to be very mindful of. And that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to second Councillor Collins's motion to make those adjustments those three adjustments that Mike Zegeric identified. And I look forward to receiving this great presentation and getting on with the next round of budget processes, which is all the departmental budgets and boards and agencies that are yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I've made a note that you'll be seconding Councillor Collins' motion at the appropriate time.
Appreciate that.
The next speaker is Councillor Pauls. My apologies for the slip up.
Well, actually,
they moved us. The names are in a different direction this time, and it was my fault. I'm getting old, eh? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm glad that the mayor went before me. That was a lot of information, and I thank you for that, Mayor. I just wanted, first of all, I really want to thank General Manager Mike Z. And the reason is this: he took time to give me the Coles note of the budget. And it is so good to do that because, as we all know, the budget is a thick, thick, thick book. So thank you. My question is this. And it touches on what Councillor Jackson said. We're celebrating how well the city's doing. We put it in the paper. We have received $1 billion in DC. And I was so excited yesterday when I talked to General Manager Mike. I called a few of my constituents and said, this is good news. Our taxes are going to be maybe 2.2, 2.5. And the first thing they say, yeah, but look at all the money they're raking in. And I just want to be clear, if General Manager, you could explain what the DC revenue goes for, and also the benefits that the city receives from them, and maybe they're not enough. Can you explain that, please?
Sure. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, happy to try to provide the Coles notes on development charges. And I'm dating myself by referring to Coles notes. Development charges relate to what the city collects from developers as it relates to typically all forms of development. There are some that are exempt from development charges we spoke to previously. And this is for the provision of services. And it's very prescribed by the province of Ontario. The city undertakes at a minimum every 5 years a study at development. And the costing of those projects determine development charges. And there are some adjustments to those. We have to capture in, for instance, the benefit of a project on existing taxpayers, ratepayers. If it's a road, there may be a benefit of that road to existing, so you discount the cost of that project. and the portion that's attributed to developers, or a benefit of a rec center if there's a benefit to existing. So again, the purpose of development charges is it's a source of revenue for municipalities to provide the services for growth. That's roads, sidewalks, traffic, water, wastewater, storm. It includes the rec centers. It includes fire, police facilities, and it is municipalities are required to put those funds in reserves, so they're in bank accounts. I'll describe reserves as a bank account until such time as we need to undertake those projects. And so they can't be used either to reduce levy impacts, to increase service levels on operating budgets. It's dictated, it's required under provincial legislation to use those funds for the purpose that they were collected for. So I appreciate $1 billion is a significant figure in any situation, and taxpayers may assume municipalities have flexibility to use those funds, especially under circumstances like this, for other purposes, but the province restricts how those funds can be used, and they can only be used for intended purposes, and that is to help to pay for capital projects required to support growth.
I should call you Mr. Cole from now on. That was an excellent Cole's note. Development charges. Councillor, you have the floor.
Yes, I was saying, General Manager, you make it so easy to understand it. From now on, anybody that calls me, I'm going to give them your number. Thank you.
I'll have to get an unlisted number.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Our next councillor is Councillor Nan. Turn your mic on, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you through you, Chair, to General Manager Zagaric for the overview. I will also have more drill down questions as we get into the city department presentation. So I appreciate the overview and getting a sense of the lay of the land of what we're deliberating in terms of our operating budget. Also really looking forward to that February report in terms of the residential vacancy tax and the vacant homes tax report, and what we might be able to do as a municipality in terms of advancing that work to the next level, understanding clearly that there are some legislative limitations in this council being able to apply something like this effectively today, even if everybody around this council table was like, yes, absolutely, we need to diversify our revenue generation as a municipality in order to ensure we have costs not only to invest more strategically and deliberately and aggressively into affordable housing, but also to cover some of these essential city services that our residents have increasingly relied on during this pandemic. So I'm really looking forward to that piece and helping our residents get educated around what limitations are there from a tax policy perspective, but also what possibility is there in terms of pursuing this as the revenue generation tool for our municipality in dealing with the systemic nature of unaffordable housing. I also just wanted to take a moment, if I can, through you, Chair, just make some comments to some of the signaling that I am hearing from colleagues around the table. Just yesterday, I was reading up on some reports from economists at the Atkinson Foundation, and she was reporting that currently economic policy makers at the highest level, including our central bankers here in Canada, are recognizing that coming out of this pandemic, the critical importance to shift our policy, our economic policy frameworks by centering people in our economy and not just looking at policy making from a stable price and profit perspective, but really thinking deliberately about how workers are doing and ensuring that our economy moving forward, the central goal of our economy moving forward is to reduce unemployment and to get more people into the workforce. And the role that the public sector plays in achieving that has historically been central. It's been critical in terms of upholding economy in times of crisis, but also in times of emergency versus corporate private sector profiteers who can simply accumulate their wealth and wipe their hands of any real commitment or responsibility for building a better world coming out of a crisis. So I just wanted to make those comments that public sector workers, whether unionized or not, here in Hamilton have played a critical role in keeping our local economy floating and also making sure that our small businesses that we all love are thriving at this time, or at the very least have some loyal customer base that can afford to order that takeout that so many of us continue to encourage our residents to do. So just some policy level comments on my part, and looking forward to drilling down into the nitty gritty of the operating budget. If there is a desire to bring it down at minus or less than 2.5%, I am looking forward to drilling down to keeping that a consistent target across all sectors. So if we're going to do a blatant, we're looking for under 2%, then we need to blatantly approach every single budget that we're going to be examining as a council from that lens, versus getting into a reasonable dialogue and a real policy discussion about what we're investing in as a municipality in terms of population outcomes for our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing as there's no more first-time speakers, Councillor Vanderbeek, I'd like to take the floor, please. If you could take the chair, that'd be great.
Happy to take the chair, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. On page 64, Mr. Zagaric, the growth management budget, it showed a 40% increase. And I was trying to understand, at least in this preliminary document, it really didn't help me understand where that increase is coming from. Do you happen to know? Or do I have to wait until the department reviews come in?
Mr. Zagaric?
Yeah, so through the chair, I think there's some adjustments to reserves, but I don't want to assume that. So happy to provide that information, by early next week to all committee members, so that you're not waiting for the departmental presentation. So again, happy to send that information on to committee members.
Thank you. That was one of the ones, Madam Chair, that really jumped out at me, and wow, that's huge compared to our 2% request. The other question, and I'm not sure if you have an answer to this one, is the land ambulance agreement with the province. We have this annual payment we're supposed to be getting for 50% of the operating and the capital that's been approved by the province, and they clarify capital that's approved. Are we up to date with the province to 2018, 2019? Where are they with the payments to us? Because historically they've been behind a year to 2 years.
Yeah. So through the chair, I'm happy to provide an update, and either Paul today, or I know Chief Sanderson and Paul come through the departmental. The methodology is it's intended to be a 50-50 cost sharing between municipalities, province. The municipalities where there are enhancements, because there's a 1-year lag in that 50-50 funding partnership or share, is if the municipality, so what you'll see before you is a $1 million enhancement in paramedic services that's proposed or recommended by staff for 2021. But what we're reflecting, there's a $500,000 impact to the city of Hamilton. So the city of Hamilton would bear half of the cost of that enhancement effectively until year 2, when the province again would pick up, City of Hamilton would absorb the full cost of that enhancement in year 1, and then in year 2, the province would provide its 50% share. Having made reference to the 50-50, it's not always been 50-50 when there are reconciliations that are made. I think historically, and Paul might have through his departmental presentation a more updated figure. It's ranged from the low 40s to sort of that 50 or 46% provincial, 54% municipal. So theoretically, it's intended to be 50-50. And I'll describe it as a inequity. The other challenge for municipalities is we bear the full cost of the enhancement in the first year of the enhancement.
Councillor?
I appreciate that, Mr. Zagaric. Just some quick comments, if I may, Madam Chair. First off, I want to thank the staff because the complexity of this budget. I mean, the public probably doesn't understand just how complex some of these documents get, and the work that goes on in each division, line by line, to actually account for expenditures and revenue coming into the municipality. So the tremendous amount of work it goes into the budget, and they have done a remarkable job getting it down to the percent increase that we are sitting around the 2.5%. I'm with Councillor Jackson. We said 2% to our boards and agencies. Ideally, and I'm using the term ideally, 2% would be the target mark. The reason I say that for our budget is I am receiving more and more calls from the community where families are struggling to pay their bills because of what has transpired with COVID. Irregardless of all of the supports and benefits that the federal and provincial governments have put out there, there are still many, many families that are falling through the cracks. You know, the lack of paid sick days from the province is an issue. And, you know, just it was frustrating for me to hear from people who are saying, I had to take time off work to go and get tested for COVID, and I didn't get paid to take time off work. And then I had to wait for the test results, which took 4 to 6 days, and they didn't get paid for that. And it's just, I'm cognizant of that reality. And as we're struggling to do our budget, I think the vast majority of residents would expect us to come in with something that is in line with the cost of inflation. And that's my timer telling me that I should be quiet now. So that's roughly where I'll be going. My hope is that we get down to that 2%, Councillor Jackson. I think you're reading the residents correctly. And we'll have to see whether or not we can get there or not. So that remains to be seen. Second time speak. Oh, sorry, Madam Chair. I'll take the chair back now. Thank you very much again for your assistance in this.
Thank you.
And second time speakers are Jackson and Wilson. Councillor Jackson, you have the floor, sir. 5 minutes.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Clark, and I appreciate that that reinforcement of your last comment. Picking up on that, General Manager Zagaric, if this council wanted to get to 1.9, is that roughly, give or take, another $5 million? Mr. Deputy Mayor, through the General Manager, please.
Mr. Zagaric?
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to get to 2% would be $4.5 million. So to get to 1.9 would be maybe in that $5.5 million.
Okay, thank you. And thanks, General Manager. Oh, by the way, General Manager, you had responded, and then the Deputy Mayor appropriately said my time was up. You had mentioned about Toronto and all the extra tools Toronto has, and I was more referencing our immediate neighbor to the east, Halton, and the wealthiestness of that community. I think Oakville has regularly been, if not number one, in the top 3 or 4 in the whole country in terms of wealthy and average income. And so that's what I was referencing in terms of how, in my opinion, how nice and easy and lucky it was that they could come in at their 1.8 and already approve it. Last question, Deputy Mayor Clark, to the General Manager. Another thing to help for some of my constituents, the overall perception that local government was as busy, if not busier, during COVID with all the unprecedented challenges, and still trying to keep other services and programs and some projects moving forward in spite of some being paused or postponed. General Manager, could you in the next month or two also, I know, for example, recreation, Deputy Mayor Clark, recreation took a real hit in terms of the talent in the recreation division during the pandemic just wasn't able to express itself because many of our rec centers and arenas, playgrounds were closed for a long period of time, whether it was the soupy or the lifeguard or the admin staff at our rec centers, arenas, playgrounds. It was heartbreaking, but many of them were redeployed. And I know many of them were redeployed into areas of our 2 excellent long-term care facilities, helping with screening, visitations, whatever, at Macassa and Wentworth Lodges and other places. Through you, Deputy Mayor Clark, to General Manager Zagaric, is it possible you could provide some high level in the next month or two of some figures of redeployment to further message to some of my constituents that although that particular department may have not been as busy, but boy, we needed staff elsewhere. Through you, Deputy Mayor Clark, please.
Thank you.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm sure working with senior leadership team, that's information either through the departmental overviews or through subsequent information that we'll be able to share. So absolutely around redeployment, the councillor is correct. And it wasn't just recreation, it was across all departments. In fact, some of our corporate services staff went towards helping horticulture with respect to their planting. So it was across all departments. And then beyond the redeployment, and I'll be sure to highlight this in the corporate services budget presentation, is not only did we deliver on our regular or our expected work plan, but everyone had to pivot and take on additional work. And that includes IT in terms of pivoting to this virtual environment, clerks as it relates to pivoting to the virtual environment, finance as it relates to all the additional financial tracking and reporting, procurement, working with public health on PPE. So it's important that local taxpayers know that beyond the work that we were expecting to do, that staff really took on additional duties and responsibilities during this pandemic.
Terrific. That's a great answer, and I'm sure that will message well in the community as well, General Manager Zagirik. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor Clark.
Councillor Jackson, did you wish to move a motion to ask for a report back on the redeployment, or are you comfortable just leaving it as verbal direction?
Verbal direction, the general manager, I think, here's the import of that information. I hope it's not just for myself and Ward 6, but I think would be import information across the municipality. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, second time speaker. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I think I just have one additional question for Mr. Zagirik. In your presentation, Mike, you talk about new or enhanced user fees, and I know there has been some comment about other revenue sources like land transfer, and yes, it's not available to us, but we didn't ask. Will you be coming forward as part of this deliberation in identifying what possible new fees for service there could be? And you also state an option of reducing or eliminating fee waivers. And I'm just wondering when and how could those details come forward for this committee's consideration? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, just a reminder, the user fee report did go forward. There were limited new fees. You'll also recall that for the most part, those were inflationary adjustments. The waiving or the limiting was really in reference to a small number of user fees that in part through the mayor's task force that there was some freezing of user fees at 2020 levels, and through Councillor Jackson in your motion with respect to recreation, we froze recreation at the 2020 levels. So the intent in my presentation was to highlight those. There was an update from tourism, from the Director of Tourism with respect to the transient accommodation tax. I believe there's a commitment to report back on that opportunity. That may be more of a 2022 opportunity, but if there are opportunities such as that, I suspect they'll form part of the departmental presentations to committee in the coming weeks.
Okay, thanks, Mike. That's really good to know. I just wanted to close that one off. Mr. Deputy Mayor, I will be serving a notice of motion, and I'll look to you when I can do that at the conclusion of this meeting. I suspect in terms of that discussion we had earlier about to inform our next budget deliberation in 2022 about a process and metrics for being able to assess the utilization and performance of city utilities and assets. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I have no more second-time speakers. If I recall correctly, there are two motions that we're going to need to deal with today. Well, three actually, but the first one is an amendment from Councillor Collins with regards to what Mr. Zagaric had brought up. And Madam Clerk, do you have that motion that you could read out?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we should actually receive the presentation first because we haven't put the report on the floor yet. But I do have both Councillor Collins and Councillor Wilson's.
Okay, so I will go back to my roadmap, which was Clerk Pepperella's polite way of saying, use your roadmap. Okay, so we need a vote to receive the presentation. We already had a mover and a seconder, or no?
No.
Okay, moved by Councillor Nan, seconded by Mayor Eisenberger to receive the presentation. So that's our first vote.
The vote is up.
Thank you. It's not up on me. What do I do? Hit F5? I'm thumbs up if it doesn't pop up. Councillor Johnson. Councillor Johnson is left. She had NPCA business. He stepped away. Medical appointment. Thank you. That vote carried 12-0. And so now we need to put the report on the floor. So I need a mover and a seconder for the report, which is the information report we're talking about, item 6.1, which we're going to amend. Moved by Councillor Ferguson, seconded by Councillor Vanderbeek. And so we won't go any further on that. We'll now take Councillor Collins' amendment vote, correct, Madam Clerk?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. And that, when I put it up, you will actually, I have it moved by Councillor Collins, seconded by Mayor Eisenberger. And it will show when I put the vote up that the following amendments to the 2021 operating budget be approved. Corporate financials, operating impacts of capital, remainder 2,492,100. Non-program revenue POA, SRA funding for foregone revenue, and that looks like it's minus 1,043,500. And Public Works Blue Box municipal funding allocation minus 1,389,950.
Thank you. Any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, we'll go to the vote, please.
And the vote is up.
And I'm a thumbs up. For some reason, my e-scribe is. And that vote carries 12-0. Thank you. Councillor, would I do Councillor Wilson's motion now, or finish this report? It should be a part of the body of the report, right?
Just for clarification, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Wilson, are you asking staff to report back for the 2022?
Yes, I'd like to serve a notice of motion, and it would be to provide a methodology to so that we could use it in our assessment for 2022. Thank you.
Okay, then it would be separate from this, and we can go ahead and take the vote now.
Thank you very much. So we'll now have the vote on 6.1 as amended. And I'm still a thumbs up, Madam Clerk.
It's coming. Vote is closed.
And that carried 12-0. And now, Madam Clerk, I need your assistance. Is this going to be a motion or a motion because it came out of the business of the meeting?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it can actually be a motion. And then if Councillor Wilson prefers to leave it as a notice, she can, but she can go ahead and move it today as well as a motion.
Thank you. So, Councillor Wilson, the discretion is yours. You can leave it as a notice or move it as a motion.
I'd like to leave it as a notice, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And it will.
Can we read out that notice of motion?
Certainly. It says staff be directed to review the utilization and performance of city utilities and assets and report back to the General Issues Committee for 2022 operating budget.
And so just to be clear, so that'll come back to the next budget GIC meeting, Councillor Wilson, for motion. Okay. Okay, going back to my roadmap, which has kept me out of trouble. General information, any other notices of motion? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn, moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Ferguson, and that's a recorded vote. And I'll give a thumbs up to adjourn. Thank you everyone for your participation today. Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. You also. Thank you.
Thank you. That carried 12-0 for everyone's benefit.
Doing a terrific job, Deputy Clerk. Thank you.
God bless you, Councillor Jackson. Have a great weekend, Mr. Mayor. And we're